There we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Shit Friday. What? Oh, sorry. Deeper Than Dogma, episode 15. Today we're discussing atheist arguments for theism or just for atheism. I'm sorry, I should say against theism. I'm an idiot. So anyway, I'm just going to kick over to Ozzy because we love his speeches and he already has quite a bit to say on the subject, and then we'll start moving out to everyone else. We have, just going to go off, we have Abraham, Cliff, our good friend Xbox is Deeper Than Dogma, Floyd is here, Kevin, Ozzy, Simon, and DPR has joined us. So welcome everyone, and let's get started.
Awesome, thanks so much.
Thanks. Well, I hadn't prepared anything, but Xbox and I were talking a few nights ago about the definition of atheism and the use of the word atheism in history, and it's kind of interesting that the word atheism has a kind of colorful history. I mean, we think nowadays of atheism as either a lack of a belief in God or gods, or the belief that there are no gods, depending on what your position is on how we define atheism today. But we think of it as someone who really thinks that, for whatever reason, and to whatever degree of confidence, that there aren't gods. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, the word atheism, atheos, so from the Greek word, arose in a context of pagan Rome, the Greco-Roman Empire, and when virtually everybody was a theist. In the pagan world, there were all kinds of gods. There were, of course, there was the pantheon of gods of Rome, but of course, the Roman Empire was a conquering empire, and wherever they went, they encountered the local pantheon of gods of the people that they were encountering and subjugating, or warring with, or allying with. And under paganism, there wasn't this sense of theological rigor that you could only worship your gods. It was understood that reality included all kinds of gods. Gods could be regional, for instance. So there were the gods of Rome, and that is the gods that favored Rome and the Roman Empire. And then there were the gods of the Egyptians, and there were the gods of these other people over here. And so there was no particular animus towards people who worshipped completely different gods. Very often they identified, oh, that god over there is really just another name for our god over here. But very often they thought, no, they have their gods and they're completely different. And there were domestic gods, there were the household gods, and then there was ancestor worship. People, emperors, for instance, could be deified, could become gods while they're alive or upon their death. And then if out in nature, if you went out into a forest or a glade or a stream, there was a god of that stream, there was a god of that river, there was a god of that forest. There was just lots and lots of gods. And in the Roman context, there was a bit of a problem when they encountered monotheistic Judaism. Here was an ancient religion that they recognized to be an authentic and ancient religion that was worthy of some respect, but these people only worshiped one god, and it took some time for the Roman Empire to sort of accommodate itself to the idea of monotheism, that there was a group of people who would only worship one god, and really what they required was that of these people who would only worship one god was that they make certain obeisances to the Roman gods. So, for instance, you would take a pinch of incense and throw it on the fire, for instance, and that would appease the gods. And worship in the ancient pagan world was somewhat different. It revolved less around dogmas, and it revolved a little bit more around civic duty and obeisance to the gods that protected you. The gods of Rome were the gods that oversaw Rome and kept a protective hand on it. And they had to be appeased. They had to be propitiated. And if you did not, they would lift their protective hand, and then all hell could break loose. Things could go very badly. And so it was understood that you had a civic duty, a civic responsibility to worship the gods, to propitiate and appease the gods, to pay temple taxes and make offerings and things like that. Worship was very different. It was conceived of in a much more propitiatory appeasement form of an appeasement relationship. And so when Christianity arose, here was now a newfangled religion, and the Romans didn't have a lot of time for newfangled religions. The newfangled religions they didn't think were worthy of respect. They called it, they had a name for it. They called it superstitio, where we get the word superstition. and they just thought that these were ridiculous religions. They were made up, and they were not real, and they were not worthy of respect, and you didn't have to make accommodations because these were not real religions. And so Christianity, when it first emerged in a Roman context, was seen as a superstition, something, just like a frivolous new cult that arose, and they had no time for it. And Christians, though, those earliest Christians in the first couple of centuries were rather recalcitrant in that they refused, at least a lot of them did, refused to propitiate the gods, to throw even a pinch of incense on fire. Now, of course, some did, but many didn't. And this made Christianity a threat, literally, to the empire. It was seen in that context that they were not doing their civic duty. I mean, they didn't care. You want to worship this Jesus? Well, go ahead. I mean, the Jews worship Yahweh, no problem, right? But there's something that you need to do here, and that is you need to appease the gods of Rome. And this is a civic responsibility. You are un-Roman. You are uncivic. It's like the concept of being un-American. For some people today, if you don't worship Jesus, you're un-American. Well, that's how it was seen by the Romans, actually. Christians were un-Roman, and were jeopardizing the very safety, the security of Rome, the Pax Romanitas, the peace of Rome was at stake. And this could not be allowed, and this is why there was, in fact, some persecution of Christians at various stages in early Christianity. All of this sort of build to the point that the word that was applied to Christians was that they were atheos, that they were atheists. They didn't worship the gods of Rome. They only believed in this one God, and they would only worship this one God, and this was atheism.
Yeah, that's what started out the whole question, because it showed that an atheist was believing in a god.
Yeah, I wonder, actually, if there's a passage in Psalms that's quoted quite often. I wonder if they meant something similar, like these other people who do not worship our God, when they refer to, the fool has said his own heart, that whole line from Psalms. I wonder if they meant something similar, given the time period when it was written.
Yeah, there were. Remember, that would have been written in a time when you had either a monolatrous religion, a religion that believed that there were many gods, but only one God was to be worshipped, or it might have been at that stage monotheistic, where they believed there was only one God to worship. But they were surrounded by cultures and peoples and ethnicities who worshipped many gods. And so when people said, the fool has said in his heart there is no God, they're talking about the fool has said in his heart that this God isn't real. Right, they worship another god. Right, there were no atheists back then.
Yeah, they're not referring to modern non-believers, which was kind of there were some back then, but we don't really know very many of them.
Well, I mean, there were some sort of Greek philosophers and Roman philosophers, right, who would have been sort of outliers who were arguably atheists.
Well, there are so few of them; they wouldn't be worthy of a psalm.
And when the Psalms were written, I don't know how many were. I don't think that the psalmist was sort of bumping into and rubbing up against a lot of ancient Greek atheists, and there wouldn't have been many to be had anyway. So I don't think we wrote a psalm about it.
Right at the good part when you were getting right to the atheist term. So maybe I can direct it back to that.
Sure. Okay. Well, anyway, the point is that even the word atheism at one point just meant you're not worshiping the right gods, or you're not worshiping the gods that you need to worship, or you're not worshiping them in the right way, or you're not propitiating our gods. You're only insisting on worshiping your God, and this is atheism. So the word atheism sort of starts off rather differently than we imagine it today. Now, in the last few centuries, I mean, in the last 300 years or so, the word atheism, or atheisme in the French, or ateo in Spanish and Portuguese, and in all of the modern languages for the last 300 years or so, the word atheism has been seen in a philosophical way, as a largely a hypothetical philosophical position. Throughout the Middle Ages, there was a concept of atheism. What if a person doesn't believe in a god? But there was virtually no one who held such a position. No one dared hold such a position openly. I mean, Thomas Hobbes arguably, in the Renaissance, was quietly atheistic, arguably, and Lord knows how he got away with it. But I mean, really, yeah.
During that time, rather than atheists, would they be more known as apostates?
Yeah, they might. Yeah, they would have been called all kinds of things. They would have been called apostates, and even heretic. Although heretic is usually someone who just has an unorthodox belief, but still a believer. But the idea of an atheist, of someone who doesn't believe in any gods at all, was more of a hypothetical position. It was an argument that you could argue against. It was a position, a hypothetical position that you could argue against. There didn't need to be any atheists around for you to say, how do we prove God exists? Because remember, there were competing religions. There was Islam, there was Christianity. They knew about Hinduism. There were other religions in the world, and people were always arguing for the existence of God and for the existence of their gods. And one of the things that they did was they argued against the hypothetical kind of thought experiment case of a person who didn't believe in any God. How would you argue for the existence of a God to someone who didn't even believe in a God at all? And so the concept of atheism there was understood to be a philosophical position, a hypothetical philosophical position of not believing in any God or gods at all. By the time you get to about 300 years ago, where the word atheism gets used in modern languages, modern Romance languages, English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, languages like that, the word atheism is used in philosophical circles and in common parlance, as it is today actually, to mean the belief that there is no God. Not the mere absence of a belief in a God, but the positive view that there is no God. And this is how it is seen today in philosophical circles. And if you don't take my word for it, I'm going to quote a couple of dictionaries here, or a few dictionaries. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy here says, atheism means the negation of theism, the denial of the existence of God. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines atheism as a disbelief in the existence of deity, the doctrine that there is no deity. The Compact Oxford English Dictionary defines atheism as the belief that God does not exist. The Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary says someone who believes that God or gods do not exist. And Webster's Concise Electronic Dictionary defines atheist as one who denies the existence of God. So
deny seems a bit loaded. Like it's a little bit too far, because deny usually implies the thing actually exists.
Well, but you can deny something's existence, and that doesn't mean that something does exist, right? I mean, I can deny the existence of the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and all kinds of things, right? To deny the existence.
I remember looking up the word deny, and it seemed like it went more than not believe. More like deny means that there's a. It seemed to imply existence.
A better word here.
Well, the word deny functions in a lot of ways. Like I can deny you admission to my house. I can deny you access to my garage or something like that, right? That presupposes that there is in principle admission. There is that you can get in. So the word deny works in a lot of ways. But deny in this context merely means the negation of a proposition.
Right. I just looked it up around. One of the ones I noticed that threw was to refuse to admit or acknowledge, which is almost similar to what a presupposition would say. Like you know it, but you refuse to admit it.
Right. Yeah. Kind of stubborn refusal. Yeah.
Right. Let me read off the two that I saw too, because it was the state of one that refuses to admit the truth or existence of, and then the other one was refuse to give or grant.
And then the other one is also just to give a negative answers, which would be the one.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the context you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, if I can, actually go ahead for a bit more, Ozzy.
One sec. I've just had a thought. I actually do agree with you on that point, JD. So would reject be a better choice of word?
Yes. Yeah, I reject the claim that God exists on the grounds of insufficient evidence to warrant belief. It's one of those things that you need to expound on it much, because it always gets equivocated in some way. Like, oh, so you mean this? No, it's not. But that's kind of easy. I don't believe deities exist, or I believe deities are fictitious. Personal ones more likely than the deistic types.
All right. It's easier to say it on a specific one.
I feel like not believing. I'm on pretty solid ground in not believing these claims.
You see, I have a problem. I'm sorry if I don't know if Ozzy would want to continue, but I have a problem in the whole lack of belief thing. It's just looking at Simon's comment in the side chat. It says atheism is, in a broad sense, the rejection of belief in the existence of deities. Now, I have a problem with that, because it sets up belief as sort of a bona fide standard. that you should be believing.
That's right. That's right. Where Ozzy was just fixing to get. I remember our talk, and he was just fixing to get on to the lack of.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, with respect to the idea that atheism is the rejection of the belief in the existence of deities, no. Atheism is the belief in the existence. I'm not denying that you believe it. I'm denying that a God exists, right? And so philosophically, for at least 300 years in modern languages, atheism has meant the rejection of the proposition that a God exists, the active denial that a God exists, the positive claim that a God does not exist, the claim that reality includes no gods. That has been the philosophical position. Okay, that is what is referred to by atheism. Not a mere absence of belief, not someone who's just never heard of a God, has no conception of a God. Right? Such a person can't deny the existence of a God. If you've never heard of a God, your 4-year-old has never heard of a God, has no concept of a God, that your 4-year-old can't get as far as saying, I don't think God exists. Right? And it's to be understood that to assert that a God doesn't exist doesn't mean that you have good reasons for it. You can assert that a God exists for good reasons. You could assert that a God exists for terrible reasons. You could assert a God exists for no reasons. And similarly, you can assert that no gods exist for no reasons, great reasons, or terrible reasons. Right? It has nothing to do with knowledge. It has nothing to do with certainty. It is simply the belief, the opinion, the conviction, the assertion, the affirmation that gods don't exist. That's what we mean by atheism, right?
And
For whatever reasons, you can be a well-warranted, well-justified, rational atheist, or you can be a completely irrational atheist who believes that no gods exist for the absolute worst of reasons, right? So,
speaking of reasons, the thing is, atheism is true because science has proved that gods don't exist. To bring us back to arguments for atheism, both good and bad. So clearly, science has shown, we've been doing science for years now, and no gods. Therefore, no gods exist in the world. Who here thinks that's a good argument? Raise your hand. Yeah, I don't see any hands.
JD, who uses it?
Yeah. But I was gonna
what makes it a bad
a
argument?
little bit real quick, just to clarify where the burden is in that. Like I know you have that, and then you have people that say I just lack a belief, which is more of a stance where they're not actually claiming anything.
yeah.
yeah.
That used to be my position. I used to think lactism was valid, and then I learned.
Yeah.
It was too weak a claim because in some respects, I lack a belief in that. I heard the claim and I rejected it, and it doesn't really, for the most part, it doesn't bother me that I don't believe it. However, it's a little too weak because I think there are still good reasons to not believe rather than just not accepting the first claim I heard. I think there are arguments for naturalism entire, that there are nothing supernatural exists, nothing exists that doesn't obey laws that we can discover. And so I think, lactism, it just doesn't go far enough.
Well,
I mean, I want when I say to no, hold on a second.
Isn't there a middle point that there's a positive and negative, but how about there was once? Maybe there was once gods, but no longer are.
Well, what's a negative claim? What does that mean?
Negative would be if someone asserts something, the negative would be the opposite, basically.
So claiming the opposite
it was
would be the negative.
I think a lot of the
Yeah,
time,
you can claim a negative, or you can simply reject the claim, and that would be the negative too.
Yeah, I think what I mean is, one of the questions that seems to be asked a lot is, do you believe in God, yes or no? And it's, are there any gods, or are there not any gods? And it sort of excludes the idea that there may have once been gods, but no longer are.
Like the deistic kind of position.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy who, there's a Northern Irish guy called Colin Morrison, and he got an interesting position, one which I largely hold to actually. He regards himself, he classifies himself as a strong atheist, an anti-theist, and agnostic deist, because he is open to the possibility that a deistic being existed but was destroyed in the act of creation.
Yeah, it seems to me that a person could actually be an atheist and still hold the possibility of a deistic creator, right?
That's
I mean,
me. That's
I'm
me
such a
also.
person.
Yeah.
Sorry?
That's me also.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
I hold the possibility of a personal God. I think it's unlikely, but it's not logically impossible. So I have to admit, yeah, it's possible. Just like any other hypothesis, as long as it's not a contradiction in there, it still could be part of reality. I see no reason to think it is.
Right.
I'm going a little sci-fi for a moment, but the Klingon mythology is that the Klingons killed their gods.
So now I'm missing Star Trek.
there's an interesting thing about this this lack theism, the idea that atheism is a mere lack of a belief in a god or gods, and that is that the people who define atheism that way don't realize that there's already a word in our vocabulary that has been around since at least the 1850s to describe that. Here's the definition, and this is from the Oxford Dictionary. The word is non-theism, okay, and it's defined as not having or involving a belief in a god or gods. Okay, that's non-theism, right? The Oxford English Dictionary defines non-theist as a person who is not a theist, right? We have a word, non-theism. That's not atheism, right? So what's a non-theist? A non-theist would include an atheist. It would include an agnostic, a person who is not a theist, a person who's not convinced that there's a God. It would include babies. It would include people who've never heard of a God from another culture, right? So we have a word, okay, for people who merely lack a belief in God for whatever reason, or who lack a belief in a God because they've actively come to the conclusion that gods don't exist, which would include atheists, right? Non-theism is the umbrella term. Atheism has, for the last 300 years in modern languages, been understood to be rather a narrower position, the position that there are no gods. The gods are unreal, the gods are fictions. And what happens, I think, is there's a shell game that sort of goes on in the online community when talking about atheism, where people will sometimes flee the burden of justifying their atheism by substituting in non-theism, saying, "Oh, no, I'm an atheist," and by atheist I mean non-theist. Right? I mean lack-theist.
I used to self-identify as a non-theist all the time. I considered that and atheism more or less synonyms, since atheism was not a theist.
It's okay
they were somewhat synonymous.
That's okay. I mean, it's okay to say I'm a non-theist. I mean, I'm an atheist, therefore I'm a non-theist. Every atheist is a non-theist. Every agnostic is a non-theist.
But I guess by the common definition of a non-theist, it doesn't go very far. You're not saying much.
Well, you're not saying much, and specifically, the person wants to know, well, yeah, but what's your opinion, JD? Like, let's say you hypothetically you still identified as a non-theist. If you said I'm a non-theist, I'd say, yeah, but where do you stand on the issue of God's existence? Do you actually think there is a God or not? What's your opinion? I'm not asking you to establish it, to prove it.
Well, right? that's the point where I hem and haw. I'm like, Well,
also, I'd like to throw something in. There is a situation in the UK. Whereas a vast swathe of the population behave in their day-to-day lives as if that God or gods aren't a thing, but they are not conscious atheists. It's just not a. It's sort of like disappeared from public life. And until I got into the thing and thought about it a couple of years ago, I would have been that myself. So would that fit the non-theist term? People who sort of, I mean, I know that technically apatheist, isn't it? But I think it covers it as well.
Oh, go ahead, Abraham. I've had lots to say.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily, because I just lost my train of thought. Damn.
I do that all.
hate when it happens. Like, no, come back. No, wait.
Okay. Well, I mean, there are. I'll say this in the meantime while you gather your thoughts, Abraham. There are going to be in our culture as religiosity has sort of lost its grip in our culture, and secularism is growing, and what happens is more and more people are growing up without religion, and even people who have religion in their lives, it takes on less significance. It's less consequential in people's lives. And so it's possible to sort of grow up in a secular world where you have a sort of vague sense that maybe there's a God because you grew up believing that, but it doesn't translate in any particular behavior or anything like that. You're effectively a completely secular person. You may have grave misgivings about whether or not there is a God. You might be an agnostic. You might be actually on the fence, right? So you might be a non-theist. I mean, if you're an agnostic, if you're not sure, I mean, there's two kinds of agnosticism, broadly speaking. There are the people who are on the fence, like they really don't know. They hear arguments for God's existence, they hear arguments against God's existence, and they're on the fence, and they go, I can't make up my mind. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Right? There really are such people. I used to be such a person. When I fell out of my faith, I went through a transitional period where I really could not make up my mind. And if you ask me, Ozzy, do you believe in a God or not? I'd say, I don't know. I really can't make up my mind. Maybe.
Have you ever met someone who's stuck to that position, that kind of middle ground?
Sure. There are people who go through their whole lives unable to decide. And a lot of people, a lot of atheists especially, and theists as well, will say those people are cowardly. You're only cowardly when you adopt a position that is, you're only intellectually dishonest and intellectually cowardly when you adopt a position that you don't sincerely hold. If you really don't think that there's a God, and you really don't think that there's no God, if you really are undecided, right, ambivalent on the question, then agnosticism is the rational position given the state of the evidence that you have.
I would also add, if you believe for consequentialist reasons only, that would also, I think, would count as cowardly. If you're like, I don't want to go to hell, or I think it's really nice to believe in a God.
Yeah, I mean, those are the wrong reasons. Those are motivations for believing in a God, not reasons for thinking a God does exist. But
I've actually heard that justification for belief. I think it was his name, the karate guy. His name escapes me.
Matt.
Is it Matt?
Mac Thompson or Thomas. Mac Thomas.
But yeah, he said basically, I believe because I feel better about that. It makes me feel good. And like that's a horrible reason to believe. How can anyone believe? I can't imagine believing something just for emotional reasons. It's not.
But Tommy Hall, he holds the belief because he thinks it comforts him to have these answers to things. The gap fill.
Barring motivational biases for believing or not believing, there are nevertheless people who are on the fence, who cannot make up their mind. Given the state of the evidence before them and how they weigh the evidence, they're on the fence, and that's a respectable position. If you really find yourself between a rock and a hard place and you can't make up your mind, you shouldn't pretend that you believe one or the other. You should honestly say, I really can't make up my mind. And then there are other kinds of agnostics, what are called Huxleyan agnostics sometimes, in honor of the person who coined the term agnosticism, Thomas Henry Huxley, in the 1850s. People who believe not only it's a stronger form of agnosticism. It's not the claim that I can't make up my mind given the state of the evidence before me, but rather nobody is in a position to know if there's a God or not. No one is in a position to even have a rational, warranted belief that there's a God or a rational, warranted belief that there is no God. All of you atheists and theists are bullshitters, right? That's the view of the Huxleyan agnostic, right?
I've heard that referred to as militant agnostic. I don't know and you don't either.
Right, that's right. But it's not even no. It's not even no, because it's just a matter of you don't have a rational reason to believe. Forget knowledge, forget certainty, you don't have a reason to confidently assert that a God is probable or a God is improbable. We humans are just not in that position. That's another kind of agnosticism. And that is a position also that has a burden of justification. If you're going to make that claim, you better have reasons for thinking that the question is unanswerable and that there's no rational way to align yourself with theism or atheism.
Right.
Every position with respect to God's existence is a claim about reality, right? And when you're making claims about reality, be they positive or negative, you have a burden of justification. So that's my view of it. Sorry, Jay.
That's okay. Would that be similar to how people use the word agnosticism today, which is the claim is incoherent and therefore I can't really weigh in on it at all?
Yeah, I think you mean igtheism. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, igtheism. Yeah. I heard agnosticism as well.
I've not heard that expression, but igtheism is sort of the more colloquial way of describing a position, a philosophical position known as theological non-cognitivism, which is the view that the concept of God and all God talk is incoherent. The concepts are incoherent. They don't actually they're not meaningful. It's not that they don't refer to something real. It's that the talk is meaningless. It's literally meaningless. It's so incoherent that nobody can get even as far as making sense when they say a God exists, and you're not making sense when you say God doesn't exist. All the talk is nonsense. It's like someone asks you, do you believe in, square circles that wiggle redly? That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. I don't even know what you're talking about. I can't assert whether it exists or not. It's incoherent. It's meaningless talk. You've just strung words together.
I found the definition of agnosticism. Obviously, Google is a wonderful thing. Is the view that any religious term or theological concept presented must be accompanied by a coherent definition. Without a clear definition, such terms cannot be meaningfully discussed. Such terms or concepts must also be falsifiable. Falsifiable would be one that that would make me an agnostic in a sense, because I don't think I've ever heard a theistic concept that was falsifiable, or at least the people who are presenting it were not interested in falsifying it. They're interested in protecting it from falsification. I run into that constantly, especially with creationism, where no matter what I offer rebuttal, there's some kind of way, like, well, maybe it would eventually come out to, well, some version of mysterious ways. Well, Yahweh must have just wanted to do it that way because.
But we've got to be careful with not unfalsifiable, though. A concept can be meaningful and still be unfalsifiable.
True,
right?
true.
You can advance a concept that makes perfect sense, but there's no way to falsify it, right? You shouldn't believe it. You probably shouldn't believe in it.
I'm referring specifically to God claims. Can a God claim be meaningful without being falsifiable?
Right, but atheism is not the view that that these concepts are merely unfalsifiable. They're unfalsifiable because they're meaningless. They don't mean anything. It's just blab. Okay?
Yeah.
And consequently, no one is actually a theist or an atheist. So, again, a theological non-cognitivist or an atheist is another kind of non-theist. This person is not a theist. This person is not a theist because this person thinks nobody can be a theist. It's impossible to be a theist. It's an incoherent. It's incoherent talk. It's not merely unfalsifiable. It's unfalsifiable because it means nothing.
Now that you've described it, I don't think I can get behind that. It seems almost like non-theism, like you're going too far, or you're not going far enough. Like they want to back away from the whole conversation.
Well,
can I? Oh.
No, please go ahead, Wayne.
Can I just take one short step back just to pick your brain, Ozzy, and sound you out on something? You know, common or garden variety agnosticism, not the textbook form, not the Huxley kind. But do you think it plays into Pascal's wager a tad? Because like the people that say, I don't believe in God, but I don't want to say that there isn't a God because Jesus might be mad at me.
Oh, real quick, is the Hangout still gonna go on live? Because Xbox left.
We'll see. He's probably having trouble with the internet, so
yeah.
if he comes back soon enough, it'll stay live. Otherwise, it'll drop, and we can start up in another. I can start if he completely disappears. I will start a new one on my channel under the same name or similar name, like part 2. We screwed up part 1. Hopefully, it keeps going live. Everyone, keep an eye on the live thing, see if it disappears.
Yeah, I think there's once the host leaves, it's something like 8 minutes afterwards that it stays live.
I think we've kind of exhausted. We kind of gotten the definitions pretty clear. Although obviously people can mean whatever they want by words. That's something. Honestly, I learned so much from these conversations just from listening to one person argue from one side or the other. I've learned plenty of things from creationists, from other fundamentalist Christians, from liberal Christians, and from atheists having debates. And this I learned from Dillahunty, that words have usages, not meanings. Although I heard he might have gotten a little bit of that from you, Ozzy.
Yeah.
And that's something I just never thought of. I just never, crap, that's actually right, isn't it? We give the words their meaning. Ozzy, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to address Wayne's point. Yeah, I think if a person is and then I'll return to your point, JD. If a person is an agnostic, is really on the fence, can't make up their mind. When they look at the reasons for believing in a God, they look at reasons for thinking that there's no God. If they still find themselves on the fence, that person is especially vulnerable, I think, to motivations that are not good reasons for believing or disbelieving, for believing that God exists or for believing that no God exists. I think that person is most susceptible to arguments like Pascal's wager, which appeal to fear, right? Watch out, you better consider the consequences, right? So emotional appeals and things like that, I think, are are more effective on a person who's literally on the fence that way. And we've probably all been talked into a position that we shouldn't hold in hindsight because we were on the fence, and then some motivational consideration came along that wasn't a proper reason to accept the position, but we accepted the position for the